Bonjour, je m'appelle Félicia Tremblay, je suis directrice diversité et relations communautaires chez Fierté Montréal. Bienvenue au panel Bispiritualité et décolonisation version pandémie. Alors aujourd'hui, on a la chance d'avoir avec nous Diane Labelle. J'aimerais aussi tout d'abord reconnaître que les territoires sur lesquels je vous parle sont des territoires non cédés, gardés par le peuple Gahaga et s'appelant Montréal, mais en fait s'appelant réellement Tchouktchagou. Diane Labelle is a two-spirited person of Iroquois ancestry. She has worked in education for over 35 years as a teacher, consultant, administrator, and workshop presenter. She has a M.Arts in Political Science and postgraduate degree in Education and Special Education and Management. She enjoys hosting events and giving talks on the topics of Indigenous education and the Two-Spirit. Diane Labelle has been active in the LGBTTSS rights movement since her arrival in Montreal in 1976. She presently works as a director of the First Nations Regional Adult Education Center located in Ganawagi, where she lives with her partner of 27 years, with 2 children, and her granddaughter. Welcome, Diane. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me. I was listening to your introduction and I realized, gonna have to update that a little bit, right?
Okay, sorry, would you update us, please? Can you tell us more about yourself?
The only changes is that I'm no longer director of the Adult Ed Center, but regional pedagogical coordinator for the First Nation School Council on Adult Education. So rather than working in one community, I work with the whole region and all of the nations. In addition to that, the other change would probably be that my partner and I, we just celebrated our 30th anniversary, and we have 6 grandchildren now. So things
Wow,
are balanced. Yeah, so the life changes quite quickly.
Yeah, bio is due for an update. Okay, so today you're going to share our knowledge about Two-Spiritness, decolonization. What is the link between both for people mostly who don't know so much about the subject?
Well, two-spirited is a difficult term to use, and it's one of those catchwords that has been developed to try and explain the nature of individuals who play special roles or used to play special roles in their communities. So prior to colonization, and by that I mean the arrival of the Europeans, more specifically the arrival of the British and their view of colonization and takeover, and the imposition of a binary gender system. Prior to their arrival, there was no concept of difference based on gender. Essentially, that doesn't mean that there weren't males and females. There were, those were biologically male or biologically female, but their definition and their roles were not defined on that biology, but rather on the role that they would play within the community. Gender was not an issue. You could choose whichever role you felt was appropriate for you. And then there were those individuals in the community who actually had the ability to transcend their biology in order to be able to fill many roles within the community based on what was needed. So in essence, you had more of that fluctuation in choosing a role. So a young girl could choose to become a warrior, or a young boy could choose to become a caregiver. It was not based on their biology. With the arrival of the Europeans and their view of this binary world, which also contained in that your status as a person, as a human being, so that males or the masculinity became the dominant person. And with time, we associate that with gender. Male gender, therefore superior to female gender. Those who have a male physique then are more capable of those who have a female physique. And those who do not see themselves as neither one nor other, or cannot fit in one or other defined gender, are the ones that are wrong, are the ones then that have to be either converted and make a choice, or be eliminated, right? Either put away, or as the Spaniards did, actually destroyed, physically killed. So the idea of notion of sin, if you don't fit in one or other, new notions of sexuality began to be imposed. And this notion of status and property came with the arrival of the Europeans. And it began to change our sense of who we are and our sense of how we fit in the world. And for many of us who are neither this nor that, being able to define your role and your place became impossible, and extremely difficult. So extremely difficult to impossible, to the point of actually destroying your sense of spirit. So that's a soul wound. You know, it's a soul wound because your sense of purpose and your place is your spirituality. Your connection with everything is the base of your spirituality. And so when you deprive people of that ability to be able to define their space and their function and their place and their connection with everything else, when you continuously say, you don't belong because you're neither this nor that, there is no place for you, and we install in that all of those other institutions that continue to promote this, the individual, you know, succumbs to the soul wound, becomes, you know, a person who cannot derive any pride in who they are, and therefore no sense of being. So it's not, you know, it's not surprising then that, you know, that there's, you know, so much self-harm in a population that cannot be allowed to express themselves for who they are. So colonization has done a great deal of damage in the indigenous world on so many levels. This issue of gender, however, really has impacted the way in which we function as people within society. Because those who came back from residential school, so we're talking 5 to 7 generations of individuals that were taught that the way that indigenous people saw the world before is no longer valid or good. In fact, it's sinful. Therefore, you must rid yourself of all of those beliefs and values, distance yourself from people who do not support the new values that they're being given, and changed forever the way that we are looking at, we look at the world. So in matriarchal societies like the Ganyageha, well, what happens with that, the Ganyagehaga, what happens with that is that women who were actually the form of authority and the glue of the nations were completely ignored and actually put down with this new system, this new order that's imposed, and physically threatened, and made subject to so many different aspects that weren't there before. It displaced them, displaced the women, and then displaced anything that was feminine. So here we go, any individual who may have been born in a masculine body who does not show this robust male kind of concept and view, is seen as weak, is seen as not valid, is seen as not as a non-person essentially. Or any woman who displays that robust kind of. So what it did is that anybody who did not fit whatever typical view and role and beliefs and activities that go with those gender definitions are the ones that need to be eliminated, essentially, in one way or another. And so colonization has left a great deal of impact when it comes to gender identification and sense of pride and ability to develop one sense of spirit and connection to the world.
Thanks. No, that's Great. It's so like you were actually answering questions that I was I was getting to there, and then you were just no, you just yep. You know, like before reappropriating my identity and kind of going towards the expression two-spirited, the only terms I'd known to understand my two-spiritedness was like saying, I feel I have both masculine and feminine, but in one, And today I'm in reference to what you just said, I'm actually, I'm trying to derive from using masculine, feminine because I know that it's um, we need to go above and beyond these terms. But basically, what I tell people is, put masculine, feminine aside. Is what I mean is like the energy of the sun and the moon. Both are needed. Both are equally strong, and both can feed each other. Without they both have their time, and they both exist simultaneously. So that's kind of how I tried to describe my two-spiritness. Does that make sense to you? Because I was actually thinking, I wonder what Diane would think about that.
You're right. I mean, so the sun and the moon are the ones that are used. Like even within our tradition, so the sun is the elder brother, right? Has a masculine persona kind of thing. And then you have the moon, which is grandmother moon. And so she has that female side. Well, essentially, it's not male and female. What it is like for us, it's two forms of energy. So for indigenous cultures, you'll see that across the board with indigenous nations, is that the seeking of balance is crucial, right? So the crucial element of balance has to be achieved one way or another. In fact, in most of our ceremonies, you always have to have the balance of the two in order to be able to have a ceremony. So in some nations like the Haida, yes, you have a two-spirited person who is central to all the ceremonies because it assures the balance, right? So in Haudenosaunee perspective, so what we see is the balance between creation and destruction, right? So even as we talk about our creation stories, we talk about the rise of the twins, one that creates and one that adds the difficulty or the obstacle or something that could potentially balance it out. So you create the rose, you put the thorns on the rose. So it's not all beauty, right? It has its elements. If you create animals, well, then you need to be able to have those who are going to maintain the balance of population, right? So you have to create then so you have the prey, and you have to have not the aggressor, but the chasseur, so you have to have that'll
The hunt, the prey and the hunt, and the hunt.
the hunt.
The hunt.
Predator. I was trying to find the word. My age really works on my ability to retrieve my words.
Mine too.
So
Mine
predator
too.
and the so predator and prey have to be in balance, right? It's like night and day have to be in balance, like summer and winter have to be in balance, right? So the idea is to constantly have this balance. And in some ways, the view of male and female we're supposed to be seen, or we're seen by maybe Europeans as being that sense of balance. But balance means it starts on a basis of equality. And that's the difficulty with this colonialist view of the binary system, is that it's not based on equality, right? It's definitely on a kilter. We're struggling for equality. Whereas when indigenous cultures, we look at this as being, it starts from a balance and it never changes, right? So that there isn't that big difference between, or difference in value between the female and the male, or the creation and the destruction. One is not positive and one's not negative. They're both equally important and are needed to keep balance in the world. And when we look at the world presently and the state that we are in, we see how out of balance we are, right? We are out of balance because we've had more of one energy for so long that dominates, that we forget to bring that other aspect of balance in. And again, that's another element of that connection, that interconnection. This energy that we have that's been dominating for so long seems to be totally disconnected from the other aspect and the need to have that creative energy and that input. And because of that, we're out of balance. The world is out of balance. You know, we need to be able to bring that back into the circle so that we can attain that circular form that's in balance, where everything is interconnected and everything is considered and has a voice, an equal voice. So when we talk about circles, you know, the importance of the circle is that all of these voices come together and they sit in a circle. But in order to keep that form, that shape, every aspect has to be equal and equal distance from the center, right? And it's a constant reminder that we're all sitting together in the same circle and experiencing the same thing and working towards the same stuff. We're all on this earth. And if anything happens to that earth, as we all suffer. So here we have the expansion of, you know, or we have this period of time where we're all experiencing the pandemic, right? We are all equal in that ability to be able to sit and experience, but also to find solutions. To do that, we need to hear all of the voices and all of the concerns. We need to take all of that into consideration so that if we make a decision, we have to be able to see how it impacts on everything else and on everything else. That inability to look at that, right, and having tunnel vision, you know, prevents people from knowing what the impact and preparing yourself for the impact. And then you're left, you know, that expression often comes to me these days about, you know, oh, you got caught with your pants down, you know, essentially because you weren't ready. You know, you should have been able to foresee, and we hadn't. You know, all the climate movement over the years have been warning and warning and warning. We have these things that are happening. It's going to have an impact on every living being on the face of this earth. And it wasn't heeded. And so we're at a different stage. And the same thing happens now, is that this again is a warning. It's like we need to change and get back into balance, in which we are recognizing everyone and every created element within nature and live and share this earth. If we don't get back into balance, we're not going to be able to save our common interest, which is to be able to survive on this earth.
You said it. You said it. You know, it's like when we talk about the LGBTQI plus acronym and Two-Spiritness, I see kind of a straight line, and Two-Spiritness, I see a circle, you know, and like you were saying, something that's about balance, that's like so much more than just putting a word to an identity. So I know that lots of people who are not Indigenous don't necessarily understand the difference between the LGBTQI plus acronym and the meaning of Two-Spiritness. How can we kind of bring that together? I know you had just kind of actually explained the whole meaning, but how can we kind of break it down simply as to why being two-spirited is not just, example, identifying as a woman who's attracted to the same sex, or
the issue is the LGBTS plus, QS plus. How I see it more is it's a very limited definition of an individual. It's only an aspect. So it's based on either your sexual orientation, right? Or your gender identification. But being a person includes a lot more than that, right? You're a lot more than your physiology and who you're attracted to and who you sleep with, and you're more than that, because you play so many other different roles in life, and that's not stagnant either. You know, the concept of male female often says, well, women have a choice of what they want to do and what they can do, but it's as if they're fixed in those roles, right? It seems to be limited and defined. If you look at the concept of two-spirit, it goes way beyond your physical appearance as well as your sexual behaviors. It's more than that. So I would have a hard time, and when the two-spirited word came out in the gay movement, it provided a brief relief because we have a recognition, right? And it was like, wow, there's a place for us. And within this colonist idea that because we've all been colonized, right? So in this world where we're seeking to decolonize, one of the first steps is that we have to recognize the colonization effects within ourselves. Because we've also been, this is a society we've been lived in and we've been influenced by, And so when that term came out, it was like, yay, we've got a box that we can fit into, right? So it's like, yay, I'm there kind of thing. I've become a little more visible. But with time, what happened for me is that, wait a minute, it still doesn't fit right. And for a lot of people, it was the same thing. It's like, you're still identifying as either male or female, right? Or trans. But trans meant you needed to make a transition or you wanted to be the other. You are one or the other. Bisexual meant, okay, one aspect of you was more open. But again, it was always based on this binary system, right? Even the language that we use is like that, use of pronouns. And pronouns don't matter to me, right? Because I don't see that is so important. For some individuals, I know it's important. But for me personally, it's not. Traditionally in the languages, there are no pronouns that are based on gender. There's no gender pronouns in most Indigenous languages. And so it's confusing, right? So how do you maintain yourself within a box that, yes, provided you some visibility, but it's more than that. It's not a complete definition. And in that is the issue. The need to define is the issue. And that comes with colonization. Why do we have to create boxes? Why do we have to belong to boxes in order to validate, our existence, right? It's, we just are. So rather than using pronouns, I had asked an elder that once, I said, well, what do we do about these pronouns? Like, how do we define ourselves then using or letting people know how to address us? And they said, well, a sign of respect is not to give you the right pronoun, but to use your name. Yes, it's a little harder. Yes. Which brings you, why are pronouns necessary? It simplifies things. Why are boxes and labels important? Because it simplifies things. And people want to be able to understand concepts. And so in our colonialized lives, we fall into that trap of, okay, I'm going to make it simple for you. Right? So Two-Spirited or Bispiritualité did that in some ways, but it's incredibly limited in definition rather than the fluidity. And that's important for a good reason. If you look at the difference between non-Indigenous languages and Indigenous languages, the non-Indigenous languages are based on nouns and make nouns central, which is not surprising considering they make the human being central. And in this case, I'd say even the male being central, right? And the world revolves around that. And so if you have a chair, it's always a chair. Now, you want to define that chair, you'll add adjectives, but the concept of chair is what's central. So when you say chair, you already have an image of what a chair is. It always is a chair, right? And its function is always the same. In a non-Indigenous language, we don't speak in terms of making nouns central. It's action and function that are central. It's its connection to everything else that's central. So like in Ganyagehaga, we say anitsquad. That doesn't mean chair. In the last little while, we've made that link. And so when you type it in and say, what is the word chair in Ganyagehaga, they'll say anitsquad. But that's not what it is. What it means is the place where my thighs touch. Well, in any given context, that changes, right? So if I'm sitting on someone's lap, then it's the person that's Anisquality,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I'm leaning up against something, I don't know, a fence, that becomes Anisquality, right? So again, it's the function and the action. And in this quest to mainstream and do this linear thing, like get everything onto, you know, this is what it is, and define everything, you know, there's been this movement to try and create these dictionaries where you're doing this translation, but it loses so much. And it's the same thing when you're using the word two-spirit as identifying a person who may be of same-sex orientation or bispiritual or bisexual or trans or whatever, is that you're missing so much more of it by simply trying to streamline it and to create a definition that is like anchored. It also leads to a lot of conflict because you'll say, well, no, that's not what that is, right? And I see like some of the infighting that happens within organizations, or not even organizations, but, you know, populations of people as they're trying so hard to define themselves and fit themselves within those boxes that seem to be essential, right? You know, you don't have to do that in order to be able to be healthy. You don't have to do that in order to be able to fulfill yourself as a human being and find your identity. You
Mm-hmm.
can find your identity within the world and how you live, right? It doesn't mean that I have to be a woman or a man. It doesn't mean that I have to be heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual. It doesn't mean any of that. I just am. And today, this is where I am and this is my function. So I can be parent and auntie. I can be father, mother. I can be a doctor. I can be, you know, whatever it is that I want to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not anchored in stone or kulinasima. It's not, you know, defined in that way because it needs to fluctuate. I have a lot more hope now as I see this younger generation come up, this generation in particular. I'm looking at them trying to break that binary system as a way of having to define the whole world, right? And that's slowly breaking down, and I like that. I like seeing that because I think it's going to make it much easier for people to affirm themselves as human beings. My fear is that we're constantly creating these new boxes and trying to define things, right? So it needs to go a little further to break those boxes and see that there's no need for box, right? There's no need to be able to say, here we go, I'm male, I'm female, I'm other, like on the forms that they're doing now, I'm other. It's like, okay, so I can go into that other box, you know, but then what happens if, you know, why do we need to know that? Why are we obsessed with the idea of having to define that's a boy, girl, that's a man, a woman, that's a male, a female? Why? And now we're even doing it before the child is even born with all of these gender reveal parties, right? As if you're already setting people up for like, okay, because you're going to have that biology, this is what you are. You've already defined them. Now it's up to them to break that or to go with it. So it takes away that freedom and that necessary freedom of an individual to be able to define themselves as they are or not define themselves, just be.
I was actually having a similar conversation on another panel where we were talking about invisibilization of female energy identified uh, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. But then, you know, we were kind of discussing not being comfortable with using female term and like, you know, we got into all of that. And we also talked about those boxes. And I actually kind of said the same thing that you're saying now. It's so fun. Love talking to you, as always. Sometimes people, well, most people who are like not indigenous or who don't know much about the 2S LGBTQ plus communities will be like, why does everyone need a name? Why do we have to keep you know, inventing new terms and stuff like that. But to those people, I answer, so many have been erased, so many identities, that it's a necessity to work towards a healing, to name them. And boxes were, there were very few of them and they were very small. And now there's more and more, bigger and bigger, plus intersectionalities that interconnect them. And we need to acknowledge that in our language and in society and everyday life in our environment, so we can more move forwards and then erase those boxes. So it's like there was none of them. There was a certain need to create them to at least, you know, center our energies on what needs to be put to light. But the whole point, like a circle, is to come back to come back, like to do that 360, but always at a different level, a more profound level of consciousness. And yeah, so I've kind of always seen it like that too. Sometimes I tell people I feel like my life is like it's turning in circles, but at the same time it's either going up or down or through dimensions, you know, like it's never the same circle, but it kind of is the same circle. So we need those boxes, but then we need to be able to erase them. But I think they still exist to be able to so people can hop into them and eventually be able to hop out, you know? Like I personally remember, you know, when I was younger, trying to identify myself, I hopped in different boxes, and I'm kind of at the same point as you today where I identify as two-spirit, but at the same time I'm questioning, do I really want to identify as anything? Because the way I've always felt inside myself is just, well, I am who I am, you know?
The idea of breaking those boxes is actually to allow that fluidity, right? And what boxes do, yes, is that they provide some kind of protection. And at this point in time, also a necessity in terms of being able to make yourself visible and count, make your own self-value, right? In terms of society, because we have been pushed aside, or when we're invisible because we're not fitting in this binary world, when we do that, we don't have a place. We don't feel we have a place. So those boxes provide us with that kind of security to be able to be in the box and to say, okay, this is me and I'm visible here as this. But you know, like your process, as it was my process, is that you have a tendency to identify at this point in time like this, but you know, you don't want to be confined to that. All of a sudden you're getting out of that box and maybe into another box. That's the attempt to get back to what is natural, which is to be fluid, right? What happens with boxes, the negative side of the box, is that once you're in a box, people have a tendency to keep you in that box. So that all of a sudden, if you begin to speak or appear or behave differently, all of a sudden you're breaking the rules of that box.
And
Right?
also, might I add, people are afraid of what they don't understand. And that's why they want to keep everything in those boxes, you know?
Well, that's it, because then they can say, I can expect this, because now I've not only defined the box, but I've defined all of the behaviors that go with that. That's not any different than saying male, female boxes, right? And this is how a female is to behave, and this is how a male is to behave, right? So if a male behaves differently than what is predetermined as appropriate behavior for that box, then it's wrong, right? And it becomes negative. Same thing for a woman. So what happens is that for individuals who temporarily find a sense of comfort within a box, right, and want to transition, because you're right, as we go around the circle, we get a deeper and greater understanding of everything. And so we evolve. It's a natural evolution, right? And the purpose of saying that about the language a while ago is that when you limit your definition of, say, chair, right? It has a specific rule, and therefore you're not supposed to break those rules, or else it's no longer a chair. So the problem with that is that it becomes inscribed and does no longer allows for evolution. It is and always is, unless another term is created. So now it's not a chair, but it might be a, I don't know, a hammock, right? Or something like that, or a swing, or whatever it is. But then that comes with its own definitions and its own limited behaviors and its own, right? And so it's like, okay, I'm jumping out of one box and into another box, but it's always defined. It's dead, essentially, whereas language should be living. People live, nature lives. It cannot be confined. At this moment in time, a tree may behave like this or produce this amount of sap or this, but when the circumstances change or there's another point in time, that's going to become different. It may not be producing the same. It may not always be producing apples every year, right? Some years it may be barren for whatever reason. Does that mean it stops being an apple or an apple tree? Or is it a dead tree? Like it's like always trying to define actually takes away the potential to live and to evolve. And I think that's the biggest difference in the languages. So it's okay so long as we recognize that this is like a temporary step. We've yet to go, and don't get bound, don't get stopped there. Let yourself evolve. And if you still want to stay in the box, that's great. If you still want to fight, that's great. That's fine. There's no judgment there, right? The problem is that when we clearly define and put those limits and those walls around that box, we also create judgment. Because as soon as you step out or you behave differently, there's a judgment. So that's what we want to break. Yeah, we want to break that. We want to be able to, to allow everybody to be who they are, to evolve and to be fluid and to not be confined. Because essentially, it's just one further step of breaking colonization or to decolonize.
Speaking of which, some folks are not comfortable with the term Two-Spirit ou Bispirituel. And there has been some terms in different nations to describe, I guess, a person who is not in the binary. Yeah. So what if we connect that to the importance of language, what is the importance of reappropriating that word or creating our own to bring ourselves back to the source of our culture and the decolonizing process?
Well, it's important to be able to get back to the original words, and those words or those terms you'll see defined roles, right? So it could be the person who is like a death doula, right? Is also known as that person. That's a special role because you're in between. You're not defined within life. You actually are able to transcend both or understand both. You're the in between of that, right? And I think a lot of the words or the terminology that came out when they started asking, what are the terms for individuals who are neither this nor that, they were able to find these individuals who were in between, right? And at one point, an elder explained that to me. It's like we talked about the sun and the moon, right? So the sun and the moon has defined the two aspects that are to stay in balance, right? And the individual who is in between also maintains the balance between, help to maintain the balance between, and that's the realm of the Two-Spirit. Right? And she had explained it to me too, is that, if you sit at sunset and you watch the sun come down as the moon is coming up, there's a point where you're actually going to see on the horizon that little green spot where the two come to meet. And that's the energy of the Two-Spirit. And the recognition that that's essential to maintain that balance. So that kind of made me feel pretty good about, okay, so now I know that I can be of both, that I am there and I have a purpose, and that it's okay. It's okay to be this, that, or to be in that realm and to accept to walk in between. We often talk about the two sides of the river, right? And if you're always on one side or on the other side, you don't get to enjoy the whole river. The Two-Spirit enjoys all of it, right? Because we can navigate, and it's kind of cool. because we've released, actually, I think, the bonds of keeping us in one place or another. We just have to make it stronger, and we have to make people understand that it's okay. There's no judgment, because we've been under many centuries of judgment as a result of something that was imposed and definitions that, frankly, I don't think we want to fit into. Right? So, but we have to decolonize ourselves first. We have to recognize first and foremost that we've been brought up in that system that defines everything and that needs those boxes, that makes us feel as if, oh, okay, now I know who I am, right? But again, it's a very physical, it's a very, physical base of a definition, right? Whether it's your gender or your sexual orientation. It's based on a physicality versus a spirituality. And we need to get back to that. Personally, that's how I feel. Is let's focus more on spirituality than on, which is what connects us and interconnects the world, is that spiritual nature.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, you know, I tell people who aren't Native when they ask the question, the way I live my two-spiritness is not necessarily the way that another person will, you know? Can we be identify as two-spirit and at the same time identify as, let's say, a cis woman, lesbian? Like, can we have all that?
So to me, it's like I said a while ago, it's like just a small part of the definition. So yes, as a two-spirit or as a person, right? So this you have your spiritual, that's your spiritual aspect, also contains these elements. So you can identify as a cisgendered woman, you can identify it as, you know, you can define as a woman, you can define as a lesbian or a bisexual or whatever. And there's, you know, these are just aspects of your identity. It's all part of it. It's not just one thing. I prefer to be looked at as being a person that is not limited in how I am or how I'm seen or what role I'm going to play or how even I feel about myself, right? This is going to fluctuate throughout my whole life, and being forced to believe that I have to be this or that, or that I have to behave this way or that way, or I can only do this and I can only do that, provides just such an incomplete, undeveloped photograph or picture of who I am, right? There's so many elements to be put into that. Right? You're not just a person of color. You're not just a person who is sexual. You're not just, you know, you have so many aspects of you, and all of those get ignored if you're sticking to one definition.
So, you know, speaking of that definition and language evolving, you know, because like for those who still speak their language, like every time they speak it keeps living, and it stays strong, you know. Myself, I've been kind of going through the process of learning Cherokee and learning how to speak it, and it's like since I started pronouncing those words, I've like had dreams where I was just fluently speaking with an elder, and I feel like it deeply connected me to my roots, and that was something that needed to be done for me to be able to continue my process. Um, if you had to, I know we're talking about like actually not needing those words and not wanting to use those boxes, but we also spoke of the boxes evolving to finally, hopefully, eventually break free. Um, if you had to think of a term that you felt more comfortable with that would aller au-delà of Two-Spiritness that was created in the 90s, you know, something adapted to 2020, or maybe you don't, there's nothing.
No. There's an activity that I do sometimes with people in which I ask them to sit, it's, you know, face to face with each other, and for 30 seconds to define each other. Like one person begins to define themselves. I am. right? Or the other person is asking, who are you? All right. And it's interesting to see how they progress, because at the beginning, what do? We say, I'm a woman, right? I'm a teacher. I am, and so we do all of that. But as you progress, you really begin to see, okay, now you're really getting into who you are, right? And I'm an animal lover. I'm a lover of nature. I am a protector. I am, and so you begin to add in all of those other elements. So it's a recognition that, yes, it's part of you to define yourself as a two-spirit. But when I define myself, I try to say, okay, I'm going to use those words because people are not going to understand. And then I usually, if they're more curious, we'll sit down and we'll talk about what that is, right? And define it. Okay. But the idea is that when I define myself, I'll say, okay, I'm a two-spirited person. I'm a two-spirited person, but I am also this, or I'm non-binary, or I live with a woman. I am a mother. I am an auntie. I am, these are all aspects of how I define myself, right? And each of them is as important as the other one, or else I get an incomplete picture. My circle becomes this little piece if I only limit myself to that definition. Right? I'm a crier. I can cry. I have emotions. And it's so nice to hear young people be able to define themselves that way, more than just sticking to the definitions of physicality, right? I am a male. I am tall. I am, I don't know, basketball player. I am, all things that define more of the physical stuff that we actually see, but forget about looking at defining our spirit. Our physical body, and this was a lesson I learned really early on, and it really provided me with a lot of a sense of calm and understanding, is that our body, our physicality is what's temporary. It's only a glove, right? And what it shelters inside is the important part. So why do we spend so much time defining the physicality, right? And behavior is also part of that, right? If I'm same sex or I'm heterosexual, that's defining a behavior. And that's a visual thing versus inside. Does it really matter if I am heterosexual or homosexual or bisexual or trans? Does it matter? Does it touch my spirit? Does it take away from my spirit? Does it take away from the fact that I am a lover of I am a respectful, I'm respectful of nature. I am a lover of animals. I am a kind individual, or I am an organizer of people together, quelqu'un qui rassemble, so bringing people together, right? And so beginning to define yourself differently, or to see yourself that this definition, the one that's internal, is the one that's more important. At some point, that glove is going to die, but your spirit is what lives on, whether you believe in the afterlife or rebirth, or in the concept of the memory and what lives on, in people's hearts. That's what you miss, right? When people are no longer there, or when you've moved on to another realm. It's the spirit. It's the internal element of who you are, elements of who you are, that lives on.
I get it. I wish that we could just all, when we meet a new person, just see through each other as an essence. And again, weirdly, it's a conversation I was having in another panel, but it makes complete sense. So instead of looking for a new term, just continue breaking definitions. Okay, so to resume your answer, it's not about finding a better definition. It's about looking for other definitions in the sense of just break through all that. And c'est ça?
Yeah, the idea is like recognize first of all why you need the box, and it's okay. Don't put a judgment on it. That's where we are, okay? But as with everything, we're going to evolve, and to accept that we're going to evolve, and not to limit ourselves or be afraid to evolve in our own self-definition. Your spirit develops over time. Your spirit is exposed to different experiences. How you respond to those experiences adds to your sense of spirituality and connection. And, you know, to say that's what's developing within you. All right. Your body may finish growing at some point and then begin to die. Cells die, right? But your spirit will continue to grow based on experiences. So simply to comfort yourself with, you know, okay, if I need a physicality or a box right now, that's okay. But, you know, that's not going to limit the evolution of your spirit. And I think within the concept of the notion of two-spirited, the word, the adding of the spirit was trying to touch that. Because many of the terms that are there in indigenous languages talk about spirit and not physicality, right? And so that's important that we know that that's part of the definition. It's part of it. It's okay where we are right now. We're in the process of evolution, and we're always going to evolve. So rather than focus so much on the need to finally come to a term, a finite definition, right? I like the definition, the finite is in there. We need to know that that's the problem, is that just let's not limit ourselves to that. Let's not fall into that trap. Let yourself evolve with the concept that, you know, for now, that's the term that's there, right? But it's not the end of everything. You know, it's your spirit is going to continue to grow, and give it that. And to do that, you need to address that soul wound, and to acknowledge that the soul wound is actually coming from that need to define, and what other people's needs to define, right? And that impacts our spirit. We can let it impact our spirit, or we can say, no, that's not me. That's not taking away from who I am. I am this. It's all about self-identification, whatever that's going to be, and self-exploration. I know a lot of this time during COVID, we've had a lot of time to reflect on who we are as individuals, and it's brought, you know, people to question many things, and to talk about stuff, and to begin to look at, right? I need to work on this. I need to, so that process, what's important is to be able to actualize yourself, or to feel okay, to feel good about who you are. But to know that that's going to come from inside and not from the outside.
Well, that was beautiful, just like everything else you said. Thank you so much, Diane. There's like, you know, me not, as I did not like grow up with my culture, but still I had always had it inside myself that creating, just creating these links and having these conversations and being around kin that, being around other Indigenous kin where there's kind of this omnipresent sense of we don't need words. It's something that que je ressens fortement, and it's so c'est tellement apaisant because I feel like I have had to learn certain words just to better express myself or get a point through. But I also personally feel like it's useless in a sense because I'm also a person who's hyper empathetic. So I feel a lot of people's essences. And so for me, yeah, like you've been saying, one word is not enough.
It's the energy that you put out that's more focused, right? It's not because you sleep with a man or a woman, or that you wear a dress or overalls, right? It's the energy that you put out. It's the energy that connects you with others, that allows others to connect with you. And that has nothing to do with how you look or who you sleep with or how you identify. It's how you are.
Exactly. So I think that that's a good conclusion to our Bispiritualité et décolonisation discussion. Thank you so much, Diane, for everything you brought to me as a friend and knowledge, and also participating in these activities with Fierté Montréal. We appreciate very much. Miigwech.
My pleasure. Always happy to have the conversations and to, it brings a lot to me as well. You know, this is a reciprocal, as we discuss, my thoughts are going constantly as well, and you're bringing so much with your energy as well. So thank you. And I'm honored to have had this time with you.
Same. Wado. Bye.